No one spoke to her. No one even looked at her. She was the silent Omega, the girl every alpha ignored. Until the night of the choosing, when the Alpha King walked through the crowd, pointed straight at her, and said, "Her. I claim her." What began as pity became legend. And love, it might just burn the whole kingdom down. The great hall of the Emberfang Pack shimmered with gold light and tension. Candles dripped slow rivers of wax from iron chandeliers, casting a flickering glow over faces painted in hope and hunger. Perfume and dominance tangled in the air, the heady scent of alphas and omegas gathered under one roof, where lives were meant to change in a single night. Mira stood near the back, in the shadows beside a pillar carved with ancient runes. She kept her head low, her silver braid a dull ribbon in the dim light. The noise was too much: laughter, flirtation, the flutter of silk skirts. Every sound was a reminder of how out of place she was. She pressed a hand to the thin leather bracelet around her wrist, her mother's old charm, worn soft and warm with time. It was all she had left of her family. The ceremony of bonding. It came once every spring, when unmated omegas were presented before the highborn alphas to be chosen. A tradition as old as the mountains, dressed in silk and music, but still, at its heart, a transaction. Omegas were supposed to glow tonight, to smile, to flirt, to invite power with every curve of their necks. Mira did none of those things. She couldn't. 6 years had passed since her voice had vanished, stolen by grief the night her parents' wagon fell into the ravine during a storm. The healers said the trauma froze her throat. They tried potions, spells, even prayers to the moon goddess. Nothing worked. Mira hadn't spoken since that night, and in a pack that prized a sweet, melodic voice as a mark of a fertile omega, silence was a curse. She was known as the mute one, the broken one, the one no alpha would ever want. From her hiding spot, Mira studied the crowd. Betas laughed too loudly, their pride fueled by cheap wine. Alphas circled the center floor like predators, sharp suits and sharper eyes, their scents heavy with musk and arrogance. They scanned the line of omegas, jeweled, perfumed, trembling, as if browsing a shop window. "Let the choosing begin," called the herald. The noise rose like a wave. One by one, names were called, and girls stepped forward, some glowing with joy, others blinking back tears. Each match meant a future, a place. Myra's stomach twisted as the circle of unclaimed omegas grew smaller. Leora of the Riverbend. Chosen by Alpha Darien. Applause. Cheers. Another name. Another match. Mira pressed closer to the stone pillar, wishing she could melt into it. The longer the ceremony went on, the more the desperation thickened, turning perfume to sweat, hope to panic. When the second-to-last name was called, a bitter calm washed over her. She would be the last, the leftover. Again. And that was fine. She told herself that every year. It was better to be ignored than humiliated. Better to fade into the background than to stand in the spotlight and be found wanting. The herald paused, scanning his parchment. The finals omega. He hesitated. Her name would not come. It never did. Mira exhaled, already turning to leave when the atmosphere in the hall shifted. A presence entered the space, heavy, electric, commanding. The noise dimmed like a tide pulling back. The crowd parted as a tall figure strode through the golden light toward the dais. The Alpha King. Kale Draven of the Emberfang bloodline. The Wolf King. He was rarely seen at these ceremonies anymore, though they were held in his own territory. Rumor said his destined mate had died before they could bond, leaving him hollow, cold, and prone to long absences in the borderlands. Some said he hunted alone because he couldn't bear the pack's scent without her. And yet here he was. He moved like a storm-given human form, broad-shouldered, all sinew and restraint. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was tied loosely behind his head. His eyes, gods, those eyes, caught the candlelight and turned it silver. Mira felt his presence before his gaze even found her. Her breath hitched, as if the air itself recognized him. He ascended the dais without a word, scanning the room with that same detached intensity everyone feared. The Alphas bowed. The Omegas trembled. Kale Draven's eyes swept over them all until they stopped. On her, Mira froze. His gaze pinned her in the shadows, seeing through the veil of insignificance she had wrapped around herself all her life. There was no pity in his eyes, no curiosity, only something deeper, a recognition that made the world narrow to the space between them. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to look away, to break the spell, but couldn't. The herald cleared his throat awkwardly. That concludes the... Kale raised a hand. The room silenced. Her, he said, his voice deep and rough as thunder over distant peaks. 100 heads turned. Myra's heart stopped. She hasn't been presented, my lord, the herald stammered. That is, she's the silent one. Another voice whispered from the crowd. The mute Omega. Kale's silver eyes did not waver. Bring her forward. Laughter rippled through the hall. A cruel, uncertain sound. Mira stood frozen, her hands trembling, her throat tight with disbelief. An attendant touched her arm. Go, they hissed. She moved as if pulled by invisible strings, her feet barely touching the ground. The sea of faces blurred around her, sneering, gasping, gossiping. She reached the dais. Her knees wanted to give way. She lifted her gaze once, and found only calm in his. Kale Draven looked down at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he spoke again. I claim this Omega, he said, by right of bond and blood. The hall exploded in chaos, gasps, outrage, whispers, but Mira heard none of it. Her world was only silver eyes and the echo of words that changed everything. And for the first time in 6 years, the silence inside her wasn't empty. It was full of something she couldn't name yet. The uproar from the ceremony followed Mira like a ghost as she fled the great hall. The echoes of laughter, of disbelief, of whispered venom. The silent one? The king chose her? All clung to her like thorns on her skin. Outside, the wind tore through the pine woods, sharp and cold enough to bite through silk. Mira ran until the gold light of the hall disappeared behind her, and only the hush of the forest remained. Her lungs burned. Her heart ached. Why him? Why now? Why her? It couldn't be real. It had to be some cruel gesture, a political move, or worse, pity. The Alpha King didn't see her. No one did. She had been invisible for years, existing on the fringes of the pack like a shadow. He couldn't have chosen her, not truly. She stumbled into the clearing that housed her small cottage. It was little more than stone walls and a thatched roof, surrounded by her garden of herbs and roots. The place smelled of dried lavender, rain, and safety. Mira pushed open the door and collapsed onto the old armchair near the hearth. Her chest rose and fell, her body trembling. The ceremony, his gaze, his claim, it replayed over and over in her mind until her thoughts blurred into exhaustion. She lit the fire, the familiar ritual calming her nerves. Outside, the night deepened. The first growl of thunder rolled across the valley. She should have barred the door, but she didn't. When the storm broke, it came with a vengeance, a sheet of rain and wind that rattled the shutters and howled down the chimney. The lightning flashed white across the room, turning her small world into fragments of brightness and shadow. And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. At first it was faint, a low, pained groan beneath the roar of rain. Then came another, closer, heavier. A dragging sound. Something was moving outside, just beyond her garden. Myra's breath caught. The rational part of her mind whispered stay inside. But another voice, older and gentler, her mother's, whispered back, compassion is the oldest kind of strength, Mira. Don't forget that. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and her lantern from the mantel. The flame inside flickered wildly as she unlatched the door. The wind hit her like a wall, flinging her hair into her eyes. Rain soaked her thin dress in seconds. She held the lantern high, squinting into the darkness. The sound came again, a whimper this time. Not human. Not fully animal either. Mira stepped into the mud, her bare feet sinking into the cold earth. The scent of iron hit her, blood.
She saw it then.
At the edge of her herb garden lay a massive wolf, dark as night, his body twisted in pain. His flank was torn open, blood matting his fur. Lightning flashed, illuminating the size of him, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen. Too large. Mira froze. Every instinct screamed run. An injured alpha wolf was more dangerous than any weapon. Then the beast's head lifted. Silver eyes. Her heart lurched. It can't be. The wolf's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle. His left foreleg bent at a wrong angle. And there, tucked beneath his chest, a small bundle wrapped in a torn cloak. It moved. A child's cry pierced the storm. Myra's terror turned to disbelief. The wolf, the king, was bleeding out on her doorstep, shielding a pup no bigger than her forearm. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. The sight was impossible, yet undeniable. Her hand tightened on the poker. "Oh, gods," she whispered, though no sound passed her lips. The words were only thoughts, prayers sent into the wind. The wolf shifted, a low groan escaping him as his body trembled. His eyes, those same silver eyes that had found her in the hall, locked onto hers now. There was no rage in them.
No dominance.
Only pain. Only trust. Her fear shattered. Mira dropped the poker and ran to him, kneeling in the mud. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't care. She reached for the bundle beneath his body, a tiny, whimpering baby, pale and shivering, wrapped in the king's cloak. "Sure." She mouthed soundlessly, cradling the child close to her chest. Its small fingers curled weakly against her neck. When she looked back at the wolf, his breathing had slowed. His eyes fluttered shut. "No," she mouthed again, panic surging through her. "Stay with me." She couldn't lose them, not both. She threw open her door, the lantern swinging wildly, and dragged him toward the cottage. He was impossibly heavy, but adrenaline made her strong. Inch by inch, she pulled him inside, her bare feet slipping on the wet floorboards. By the time she managed to close the door behind them, she was shaking with exhaustion. The wolf collapsed near the hearth, his sides heaving. Blood pooled on the rug, dark and slick. Mira moved quickly. She had no training beyond what her mother had taught her, but it would have to be enough. She laid the baby in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, then turned back to the wounded creature. "Stay," she mouthed, gesturing with trembling hands. "Don't move." He didn't. She washed the wound, her fingers numb and clumsy. Every so often, she glanced up, his gaze never left her. When she was done, she packed the wound with crushed herbs, tied a strip of cloth tight around his flank, and bound his leg with pieces of firewood. Her hands were stained red by the end. The wolf's breathing steadied, his eyes half closed. Mira sat beside him, soaked, trembling, watching his chest rise and fall. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, beneath the glow of the fire, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of trust, spun from silence and blood. And for the first time since her parents' deaths, Myra's loneliness broke. She wasn't alone anymore. For 2 days, the storm refused to leave. It prowled outside Myra's cottage like a restless beast, battering the roof with rain and rattling the shutters with wind. Inside, a quieter storm brewed, one of fever and breath and slow, desperate healing. The wolf, him, lay before her hearth, wrapped in bandages that were quickly turning crimson. Mira had changed them so many times her fingers trembled with exhaustion. Every time she thought the bleeding had stopped, it would start again, seeping through the cloth like stubborn defiance. But he lived. Somehow he lived. The baby, the tiny boy with pale lashes and a faint dusting of dark hair, slept in a nest of blankets beside the fire. His breathing was soft, fragile. When he stirred, Mira would warm milk over the coals and feed him from a makeshift bottle she'd crafted from a glass vial and a leather stopper. She had started calling him Riven. The name had come to her in a half-dream, the sound of thunder and breaking stone. A name for someone who had already survived something impossible. And as for the wolf, she didn't dare name him. Naming him would make this real. Still, she spoke to him in her silence. Her thoughts poured into the space between them, as if her heart could speak what her mouth could not. "You're too stubborn to die, aren't you?" she thought one night, wringing out another bloodied cloth. "Even the storm gave up, but not you." The wolf's ear twitched, a flicker of awareness. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm now. His fur gleamed damply in the firelight, black streaked with silver scars. His scent filled the room. Rain, pine, and faintly, smoke. Mira set aside her bowl and brushed a trembling hand against his head. "Sleep," she mouthed, and though no sound came, something in the air shifted. The wolf let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and rested more deeply.
She didn't sleep that night.
Instead, she sat on the floor beside him, the firelight painting her in shades of gold and shadow. She stared into the flames and wondered what gods she'd angered to deserve this, or what blessings she had accidentally caught. When dawn came, weak and pale, she stepped outside to fetch more water. The forest was washed clean, glistening. Mist curled between the trees, and the world smelled of wet earth and rebirth. For the first time in days, the silence felt peaceful, not heavy. She carried the bucket back inside and stopped dead in the doorway. The wolf was awake. Not half-conscious, not drifting, but awake. His eyes were open, gleaming silver, watching her with startling clarity. Mira froze. Her heart stuttered. He shifted slightly, testing his bound leg. A low, rumbling sound left his chest, not a growl, not quite, something closer to a question. She set down the bucket carefully, palms raised. "It's all right," she mouthed, her lips forming the words slowly, gently. "You're safe." The wolf tilted his massive head, as if he understood. Cautiously, she knelt by him. The firelight reflected in his eyes, the same eyes that had found her in the hall, piercing, knowing. She swallowed, unable to look away. "Drink," she mouthed, holding a bowl of water toward him. He hesitated, then lowered his muzzle and drank, his throat working in slow, labored swallows. When he lifted his head again, droplets glistened on his fur. His gaze never left hers. Myra's pulse raced. She wanted to believe he was just a wounded creature. But the intelligence in those eyes, the way he tracked her movements, the deliberate patience, it was human. Too human. When she reached to change the bandage on his flank, he shifted his weight slightly to help her. A silent, instinctive cooperation. She froze, startled by the understanding between them. "I don't know who you are," she whispered in her mind, "but you're not just a wolf." The thought had barely formed when his ear flicked toward her. He heard her. Not the sound, but the meaning. Myra's breath caught. She felt the strangest pull, a ripple deep in her chest, as if something inside her had turned toward him. And in that moment, his voice brushed against her thoughts. Rough, faint, like a half-remembered dream.
"You saved me," she gasped.
Her hands went still. The bowl of herbs slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the floor. The wolf didn't move, but his eyes softened. The faintest hint of amusement, or gratitude, flickered in their depths. Mira shook her head. This couldn't be real. Wolves didn't speak in minds. Alphas didn't share thoughts with omegas, especially not ones like her. But his gaze held hers, calm and unyielding. "Do not fear me," the voice came again, a whisper under her skin. "You have nothing to fear." Her throat burned. 1,000 words clawed for escape, but no sound came. Only one trembling thought.
"Who are you?"
For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then,
"Kale."
The name hit her like thunder. The Alpha King. The man who had claimed her before all the pack. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. The impossible had a name now, and it lay bleeding on her rug. The wolf, Kale, lowered his head again, exhaustion pulling him down. But not before she felt another pulse of thought from him, soft and steady. "Thank you, Mira." Her heart stopped. He knew her name.
How?
The silence in the room deepened, thick with everything unspoken. Mira sank to her knees beside him, her breath trembling. The baby stirred in his blankets and let out a soft cry. She went to him automatically, but her eyes kept drifting back to the wolf by the fire, the king who shouldn't be alive, the man who shouldn't know her name, the creature whose thoughts she could somehow hear. Outside, the last echoes of a storm faded into distant thunder. Inside, something entirely new had begun. The bond neither of them asked for was already taking root, silent, invisible, and unstoppable. By the third morning, the wolf was strong enough to stand. Mira had just finished feeding Riven when she heard a low grunt, a deep sound that made the air hum. She turned, startled, and saw Kale pushing himself upright, his injured leg trembling beneath him. His claws scraped the floorboards, his ribs showing faintly beneath the thick black fur. "Stop," she mouthed, rushing to his side. "You'll reopen the wound."
He didn't.
Instead, he met her gaze and gave the smallest nod. Not as a beast, but as a man acknowledging her concern. Then, with painful deliberation, he lowered himself again, resting his massive head on his paws. Relief swept through her so hard her knees nearly buckled. She sank beside him, stroking his fur gently to reassure them both. The texture of it surprised her, coarse on the surface, warm beneath, alive. He leaned into her touch with a low rumble that vibrated through her palm. Riven made a small, hiccuping sound from his blanket pile, and Kale's head lifted immediately. His eyes went to the baby, alert, protective. "He's fine," Mira whispered in thought, smiling faintly. "You brought him here. He's safe." The wolf's gaze lingered on the child for a long moment before he looked back at her. "He isn't mine," the voice brushed her mind again, rough and quiet. "But I couldn't leave him." Mira frowned. "Then whose?" "Traitors." Kale's thought cut through hers, colder now, heavy with restrained fury. "They attacked on the northern ridge. My own men. They carried banners of my crest to lure me away. I barely escaped." His eyes grew distant. "I found the pup among the wreckage of their camp. A trophy." A shiver ran down Myra's spine. She didn't ask what kind of people took children as trophies.
She didn't want to know.
Instead, she said softly, "You saved him." He blinked once, acknowledgement or dismissal. She couldn't tell. Then his head lowered again, his energy spent. The following days fell into a rhythm both strange and comforting. Mira tended to her garden, gathered herbs, and fed Riven. Kale slept by the hearth, waking at dawn and dusk to drink water or watch her with quiet, unreadable eyes. He never shifted back. Not that she asked him to. She wasn't sure her heart could handle seeing the man behind the wolf yet. Still, it was hard to ignore the humanity in him. How he watched her with the patience of a protector, not a predator. How his ear would twitch when she moved too quietly, as if listening for the sound of her breathing. She began speaking aloud again, timidly at first, just to fill the silence. Her voice came out rough, papery, but it was hers. "Good morning," she murmured one dawn, her voice breaking on the second word. She hadn't spoken to another living soul in years. Kale's ear flicked toward her. Encouraged, she tried again. "The fever's gone down. You're healing faster than you should." The wolf gave a short huff, almost amused. She smiled, shaking her head. "You can hear me, can't you? Even when I don't say anything."
"Yes."
It wasn't exactly an answer, more a presence, a thought that lingered in her mind. And for the first time since she lost her voice, Mira didn't feel broken for speaking into silence. She felt heard. That night, after Riven had fallen asleep, she sat near the fire, her back against Kale's flank. The warmth of his body soaked through her thin dress, steady and alive. "Why did you choose me?" she asked softly, tracing patterns on the floor with her finger. "At the ceremony." A long pause. "Then, because you were the only one who didn't look at me with fear or want." Her chest tightened. "You don't even know me." Another pulse of thought. "Don't I?" The air felt heavier suddenly. Their silence wasn't empty anymore. It vibrated with awareness, with something fragile and dangerous and inevitable. Mira turned to look at him, but he was already watching her. His silver eyes glowed softly in the firelight. They reflected her image back at her. Small, tired, human, and yet, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel lesser. She felt seen. "Kale," she whispered, testing his name aloud for the first time. His pupils dilated, a reaction that felt almost human. A rush of wind swept against the windows, and she jumped. Kale's head lifted, his entire body tensing in an instant. "Someone's near." Myra's stomach dropped. "What?" He was already on his feet, silent despite his size. He moved toward the door, nose lifted, scenting the air. A low growl rolled through his chest, not loud, but lethal. Mira snatched Riven from his blanket nest, her hands shaking. Footsteps. Muffled voices outside. Kale moved between her and the door, muscles coiling like a drawn bow. "Please," she mouthed, clutching the baby. "Don't." The door banged open. Rain-slick figures filled the doorway, two men in the pack's guard leathers. One she recognized immediately. Darius. Her former betrothed. The one who had once called her broken goods in front of half the village. Well, he sneered, brushing raindrops from his cloak. "The silent little ghost still lives." His eyes flicked to the wolf. "And apparently keeps monsters for company." Kale's growl deepened. The sound made the candle flames tremble. Darius's companion, an older guard named Renik, stepped forward warily. "That's an alpha wolf. Injured, but alive." His eyes narrowed. "You should have reported this, girl." "She can't report anything," Darius drawled, smirking. "Too busy playing mute nursemaid." Myra's fear burned away, replaced by something sharper, anger. Kale moved then, slow and deliberate. One massive step forward, his fur bristling. Darius froze. "Back," Renik warned, drawing his blade. "That thing will tear us apart." Kale's silver eyes locked on Darius's. In that moment, the room felt too small, the air too charged. Mira pressed a hand against Kale's side, trying to calm him. "Please," she mouthed urgently. "Don't hurt them." He hesitated, and then, astonishingly, stepped back. Renik blinked, lowering his weapon slightly. "It understands her," he whispered. Darius's face paled. That's not possible." Before either man could react, Kale's deep voice brushed Myra's mind again, laced with command. "Stay behind me." Then he spoke aloud, not through her, but into the room, his voice rough and powerful. "Leave." The guard staggered back, eyes wide. The wolf had spoken. Renik dropped his sword. Darius swore under his breath and bolted into the rain, tripping over himself in his panic. The other followed. Silence slammed back into the cottage, broken only by Myra's ragged breathing. Kale turned to her, his gaze softening. He lowered his head, brushing his muzzle against her shoulder in a gesture so gentle it undid her completely. Her eyes burned with tears she couldn't hold back. "Thank you," she whispered, the sound fragile but real. The wolf's voice answered faintly in her mind, a soft echo before exhaustion pulled him down again. "Always." The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The storm had left behind a strange silence, thick and waiting. Mira felt it pressing against her chest as she stood at the doorway of her cottage, watching the mist curl between the trees. Kale slept again, his great body stretched before the hearth, but the peace was deceptive. Beneath his stillness, his muscles twitched, his breathing uneven. Whatever strength he had regained the day before had cost him dearly. Mira turned back inside. She had washed and dried his bandages, prepared a poultice, and now moved quietly to change the dressing on his flank. Her hands no longer shook. There was a steadiness in her that hadn't existed a week ago. The gash was healing faster than nature should have allowed. The raw edges of flesh were knitting, leaving smooth skin beneath the fur. When she touched the wound, Kale stirred but didn't flinch. "You're mending," she whispered, her voice still faint, but stronger than before. One silver eye cracked open, glinting with faint amusement. You sound surprised. She smiled softly. I am. Kale huffed, a low, rumbling exhale that almost resembled laughter. Riven whimpered from his basket near the fire. Mira went to him, lifting the child and cradling him close. The baby's small face was pinched with hunger, his eyes an uncanny pale gray that caught the light in a way that made her chest ache. She fed him while Kale watched, silent, his gaze following every motion with the quiet intensity of a guardian. You care for him, she said without thinking. Even though he isn't yours. Kale's head tilted, his expression unreadable. He was innocent in a battle born of greed. I won't see another left to die, because of me. The words settled between them, heavy and true. Mira lowered her gaze. You saved me too. No. Kale's thought came softer, deeper. You saved me first. Her throat tightened. She looked away, blinking back sudden tears. The quiet between them stretched, filled with the crackle of the fire and Riven's soft breathing. Then Kale's ears twitched, his head snapping toward the door. Myra's pulse spiked. What is it? He didn't answer. Only rose slowly, his wounded leg braced against the floor. His nostrils flared. The air in the cottage changed, the faint serenity replaced by a sharp, feral edge. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, came the faintest sound, the snap of a branch. Kale growled, low and dangerous. Myra's breath caught. The guards, she mouthed, fear creeping back into her bones. He shook his head. Not guards. Hunters. Her stomach turned to ice. Hunters. The word meant only one thing, rogues. Wolves who'd abandoned pack law, living by blood and theft. Kale's silver gaze hardened. They must have followed my scent. They'll come for the cub. For me. What do we do? She whispered. Hide the child. She obeyed without hesitation, placing Riven in a chest lined with furs and herbs to mask his scent. The baby made a soft sound but settled quickly, lulled by the warmth. Kale limped to the window, his body tense. The muscles beneath his fur rippled like coiled steel. Through the fog, Mira caught the faintest shadows moving among the trees, 3 of them, maybe 4, shapes that didn't belong to the mist. She clutched the iron poker again, the same one she'd used that first night. Stay behind me, Kale ordered. The first rogue burst from the treeline, a massive brown wolf with jagged scars across his muzzle. His eyes gleamed red with the madness of untethered hunger. Kale met him halfway. The sound that followed was chaos, claws on wood, a growl like thunder. The wolves collided, black and brown blurs tearing through the doorway, shattering the frame. Mira screamed, no, sounded for the first time in years. It wasn't words, just raw sound torn from her chest. But it carried, slicing through the storm-soaked morning. Kale responded with a ferocity that shook the cottage. He slammed the rogue into the wall, teeth flashing. Blood spattered across the floor. A second rogue lunged from the doorway. Mira swung the poker instinctively, striking its flank. It yelped, snarling, and turned on her, only to freeze mid-leap as Kale's jaws clamped around its throat. The fight was over almost as soon as it began. 2 wolves lay motionless. The third fled into the mist, tail between its legs. Kale stood panting, his fur matted with blood, some his, most not. His flank was torn open again, the wound bleeding freely. Mira dropped the poker and ran to him. No, stay still. Her hands pressed against the gash, trying to stop the bleeding. His breath came ragged, shallow. His body trembled, the strength that had carried him through the fight now draining away. You shouldn't have screamed, he thought faintly. They'll hear. The others. Then we'll run, she whispered fiercely. We'll go before anyone finds us. Kale's head lifted weakly, his eyes burning with stubbornness. I won't run from my own pack. Then let me save you again, she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. Please, Kale. Something in her voice, fragile yet fierce, reached him. He exhaled slowly, the fight leaving his body. Do what you must, he murmured, and went still. Mira worked frantically, her trembling hands covered in blood and herbs. Hours blurred into moments. When she finally leaned back, shaking and pale, Kale was breathing again, slow, steady, alive. Outside, the mist thickened. She could hear distant howls echoing through the valley. The pack, searching. They would find him soon. And when they did, the truth of what she had sheltered, a wounded king, a foundling child, and a secret bond forged in silence, would either save her or destroy her. By dusk, the forest had gone unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace, it felt like watching. Waiting. Mira sat beside Kale's still form, her hands slick with dried blood. Her entire body trembled with exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. The faint rise and fall of his chest was all that tethered her to sanity. Riven slept soundly in his chest of furs, unaware that the world around him teetered between safety and ruin. Mira ran her fingers gently along Kale's muzzle. "You have to hold on," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and fear. "They'll come soon. I know it." He didn't stir, but his ear twitched faintly, as if some part of him was listening even through unconsciousness. Outside, the fog thickened until the world beyond the windows was nothing but gray. Then, faintly, beneath the whisper of wind, came the sound of voices. Her pulse spiked. Torches flickered between the trees, oranges moving closer. Boots crunched on wet leaves. The pack had found them. Mira stood, her knees unsteady. She reached for the poker again, though she knew how ridiculous it was. She could face rogues with desperation, but soldiers of the King's Guard? Still, she moved between Kale and the door. A firm knock shattered the silence. "Open up," came a deep voice. By order of the King's Council. Her mind raced. She couldn't hide him. The scent of blood, the broken door, it would all give him away. The knock came again, harder this time. "Open, or we'll break it down." Mira swallowed hard, glanced at Kale one last time, and pulled the door open. 3 figures stood in the mist. 2 were guards in black leathers. The third was an older woman with silver hair braided into a crown, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Mira of the lowborn line," the woman said. "You've been harboring something that belongs to the pack." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it left no room for lies. Myra's heart pounded. "He's..." Before she could form another word, a deep voice cut through the room behind her. "Enough." She froze. The woman's gaze shifted over Myra's shoulder, widening slightly. The guard stiffened. Kale stood in the doorway's glow, massive and terrible even in his weakness. The firelight turned his fur into molten shadow, his eyes glinting silver. He was barely standing, his splinted leg trembled under his weight, but his presence filled the room like thunder. The woman bowed her head instantly. "My king." The guards dropped to one knee. Kale stepped forward, his breath harsh but steady. "So it's the council now that sends trackers into a healer's home?" His voice, though only in their minds, carried the weight of command. "My lord," the woman began, her tone cautious, "we thought. You thought I was dead." Kale's growl made the walls vibrate. The woman hesitated. "You vanished and the rogues attacked our borders. We feared." He cut her off. "You feared losing control, not me." The accusation landed heavy. The woman lowered her gaze, shamed but silent. Mira looked between them, confusion flickering across her face. She had expected celebration. Not tension. Not fear. Kale's voice softened as he turned toward her. "Mira." Her name in his thoughts was enough to undo her. She stepped closer, reaching instinctively to steady him. His massive body trembled under her hand, but he didn't pull away. The guards exchanged glances, clearly bewildered by her familiarity with their king. "She saved me," Kale said aloud this time, his voice low, gravelly, threaded with exhaustion and defiance. "Without her, your king would be carrion in the mud." One of the guards, the younger one, dared to look up. "A common Omega, my lord?" Kale's head snapped toward him, and the guard flinched. "She's not common," he growled. The older woman intervened quickly. My king, the council will want to tend to your wounds. I'll return when I choose, Kale said, cutting her off again. Until then, you'll tell them I live, and that the Silent Omega is under my protection. Myra's heart thudded painfully at his words. The guards hesitated, clearly torn between obedience and shock. The woman gave a slow nod. As you command, my king. Kale inclined his head once, a signal of dismissal. The guards retreated, stepping backward into the mist. The older woman lingered for a heartbeat, her sharp gaze flicking to Mira. There will be questions, she said softly. Be ready for them. Then she turned and followed the others into the trees. The moment they were gone, Kale sagged. Mira caught him, guiding him back to the hearth with all the strength she could muster. You shouldn't have stood, she whispered, tears slipping down her face. You'll tear the wound again. He lowered himself heavily to the rug, wincing. They would have dragged me from this place like a beast if I hadn't. You shouldn't have protected me, she murmured, though she knew he always would. Kale's eyes found hers softer now. And leave you to them? Never. Her breath hitched. The firelight flickered between them. Riven stirred, whimpering softly, and Mira moved to soothe him. When she turned back, Kale was watching her with that same strange look, one she couldn't name without her heart betraying her. What happens now? She asked quietly. Kale was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, his shape began to change. Bones shifted beneath fur, muscles twisting, reforming. Mira stepped back, breath caught in her throat, as the massive wolf form shrank and reshaped until a man knelt before her, his body bare, scarred, and impossibly human. His hair was dark as ink, his skin pale from blood loss, and his eyes, those same piercing silver eyes, glowed in the firelight. Kale Draven, the Alpha King, looked up at her from the floor of her cottage. And he whispered, with a voice that was both familiar and devastatingly new, I think it's time you saw the man you saved. For the first time, Mira saw him not as a creature of myth, but as a man made of flesh, bone, and quiet pain. Kale's skin bore faint lines of healed scars that ran like pale rivers across his chest and shoulders. His hair, damp and disheveled, fell into his eyes as he steadied himself against the wall. Myra's breath caught, not from fear, but from the shock of reality. He was beautiful in the way wild things were. Dangerous, raw, and inexplicably human. Kale caught her staring and gave a small, tired smile. You're not used to seeing monsters without their fur, are you? She shook her head before realizing he'd spoken aloud. Her lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came. His smile softened. Still silent then. He didn't say it as a question or a mockery. There was a gentleness to it, an understanding that made her chest ache. Mira fetched a blanket from the chair and handed it to him without a word. He took it, wrapping it loosely around his waist, the fabric barely concealing the marks of battle etched across his body. For a long moment, they simply watched each other. The cottage was warm, the fire crackling, the storm outside reduced to a distant hum. Your voice, Kale began softly, settling onto the rug before the hearth. I heard it once, when you screamed during the fight. It was the first sound I ever heard from you. Mira blinked, startled by the memory. She touched her throat, as if the echo still lingered there. It was, he hesitated, searching for words. It was the sound of someone who refuses to give up. She lowered her gaze. The word came out cracked and used. She froze, startled by it herself. Kale's head lifted sharply, eyes bright. Say that again. Her lips trembled. It was little more than a breath, but it was. Kale exhaled a sound that was half a laugh, half disbelief. You've been silent for how long? 6 years, she whispered, her voice weak, raspy but hers. The fire popped, and the world seemed to hold still around them. Then I'll make sure the world hears you again, Kale said quietly. She shook her head. No one needs to hear me. I do, he said simply. Every word you kept locked away. Something in his tone, raw, earnest, broke something open in her. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The night deepened, the flicker of firelight painting gold across their faces. Mira busied herself with tending to Riven while Kale spoke quietly, telling her things he had never told anyone. He spoke of the day his father died, the ambush that left him scarred, of the endless pressure to lead a pack that no longer believed in compassion, only power, of the council that whispered in the dark, using fear as a leash. They thought me cursed, he said, his gaze distant. Said my fated mate had died before I could find her. That's why I stopped attending the ceremonies. I couldn't stomach their games, their desperate, hollow matchmaking. Mira stilled, heart thudding. And yet, you came this year. Kale looked at her then, his expression unreadable. Because I dreamed of a voice I'd never heard, and it called my name. The silence that followed was not empty. It pulsed with something electric, something ancient. She turned away first, her cheeks warm. Dreams are just dreams. He smiled faintly. Are they? Outside, an owl called through the night, the sound soft and mournful. Mira stood, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. You should rest. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her. If I close my eyes, you won't disappear, will you? She hesitated, then said the first thing that felt true. No. I'm here. He relaxed, as if those words anchored him more than any chain of command. Within minutes, he was asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Mira watched him, the king without his crown, the wolf who had bled on her floor, the man who had seen her when no one else did. Her hand lifted instinctively to her throat. Her voice, faint and fragile as a candle in the wind, whispered the name she had only dared to think.
Kale.
He stirred in his sleep, as though he'd heard her, and a small, peaceful smile touched his lips. For the first time in years, Mira allowed herself to believe in something impossible, not destiny, not rank, but recognition. Someone had finally looked at her and seen more than silence. And she wasn't sure yet whether that would save her or destroy her. By the time dawn touched the horizon, Kale's secret was no longer safe. The forest outside Myra's cottage, once still and unbothered, now buzzed with tension. Messengers had ridden through the night, their howls carrying over miles of mist and pine. Every pack in the valley would soon know the Alpha King lived, and he had not returned alone. Mira sensed it before she saw them. That change in the air, the unnatural stillness that meant eyes were watching. She stepped out onto the porch, her shawl drawn tight. The scent of rain lingered, sharp and clean, but beneath it was something else. Unease. Inside, Kale sat near the fire, now dressed in a plain shirt she had found among her grandfather's old things. He had insisted on shifting back to his human form at dawn, saying the wolf was too fierce a message for what would come next. But the exhaustion in his face betrayed him. You should lie down, she said quietly, her voice still shaky but gaining strength with every word she dared to use. Kale looked up at her, a faint smirk ghosting across his lips. You found your words, and already you're giving me orders. Despite the moment, she almost smiled. You don't listen anyway. His eyes softened, the silver dimming to something almost human. Not to most, he admitted. But to you? I might. Before she could reply, a heavy knock echoed through the small cottage. Mira froze. Kale was on his feet instantly, every inch of him alert, dangerous. Stay back, he murmured. The door creaked open before he could reach it. Morina, the silver-haired healer who had bowed to him the night before, stepped inside, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. Two armored betas flanked her, their gazes flicking warily toward Kale. My king, Morina said, bowing deeply. The council requests your presence in the capital at once. The news of your return spreads faster than wildfire. You must reassert your command before others seek to fill your place. Kale's jaw tightened. Others already have. Morina's gaze flicked briefly toward Mira. So it seems. Mira straightened instinctively, clutching her shawl tighter. She knew that look, polite, measured, the kind people used when assessing what was unworthy of being said aloud.
Kale noticed it too.
His tone turned colder. If you have something to say, healer, say it. Morina inclined her head. Only that the pack will have questions, my king. About your disappearance. About how you were found. Her meaning was clear. About who found you. Kale stepped closer to Mira, his presence unmistakable. They can ask me directly, he said. But make no mistake, Morina. Whatever loyalty I had for the council ends the moment they look at her with suspicion. The healer's brows rose. You intend to bring her with you. She saved my life, Kale said simply. She comes with me. The betas exchanged glances, uneasy. Morina's face remained unreadable, but her tone turned careful. Then we will make the necessary preparations. The council will expect an explanation for her presence. She'll have none to give, Kale growled. Her silence is not a weakness. It's the reason I'm still breathing. Myra's heart twisted at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. But beneath it, fear coiled, because she could see what he refused to. The council would not welcome her as a savior. They would see her as a threat. When Morina and the guards left to prepare the transport, Mira sank into a chair, her hands trembling. You shouldn't bring me there, she said, her voice low. They'll turn on you. Kale crouched in front of her, taking her shaking hands in his. Let them. I've faced worse. She shook her head, tears welling. You don't understand. They'll blame me for your weakness, for your silence. He frowned. Silence. Mira met his gaze, her eyes burning. You think the council wants a compassionate king? They want a weapon, something to fear. You've been gone for weeks. They'll say I tamed you, softened you. Kale's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Then I'll show them that what they call soft is the only thing that kept me alive. For a long moment, the room was filled only by the crackle of fire and the sound of their hearts in sync. Then Kale stood, shoulders squared, and said, We leave by sunset. I'll not hide anymore. Mira watched him, torn between awe and dread. And if they try to separate us? He turned toward her, his eyes silver fire. They won't. His tone left no space for argument, but still she knew. Once they crossed into the capital, his power would be tested by those who had waited too long to take it for themselves. That night, when they finally set out, the forest was unnervingly still. The torches of Morina's escort cast long, reaching shadows through the mist. Mira rode behind Kale on a great black horse, her arms wrapped around his waist. Beneath the blanket she had riven, sleeping peacefully against her chest, the secret she dared not yet share. As they rode through the narrowing trees toward the glittering towers of the pack's stronghold, a cold wind whispered through the leaves. And in that whisper, she swore she heard words that were not her own. A storm follows the Alpha King, and it will not end until the Silent One speaks. The capital of the Blackpine Pack rose like a crown of stone and steel above the valley. Mira had never seen it before. Its towers gleamed with cold silver light, banners rippling with the emblem of the crescent wolf. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure, a place of dominance and tradition. As the procession entered the main square, the pack gathered in a restless wave. Word had spread faster than Kale's horses could run. The lost king had returned, scarred, alive, and changed. And he had brought her. Mira kept her hood drawn low, her fingers clutching the sleeping Riven against her chest. Her stomach twisted at the murmur of voices that followed them through the square. She's the one who found him. She's mute, they say. A curse, maybe. No, his fated mate. The words coiled like smoke. Kale rode at the front, his back straight, his presence unyielding. Every step of his horse was a declaration of power. But Mira could see what others could not. The faint tremor in his injured leg, the stiffness of his jaw, the fatigue beneath his steel composure. They reached the great hall of the council. Its heavy doors swung open, revealing a semicircle of elders waiting like vultures around the throne. At their head stood Lord Howrick, Kale's advisor, his graying hair bound back, his eyes sharp and cold. My king, Howrick said, bowing low. We are relieved by your return. Are you? Kale's tone was measured, but the air thickened instantly. Then why do I smell deceit in my own hall? A ripple of discomfort ran through the council chamber. Howrick straightened, his face a mask of calm. You vanished without word. We feared the worst. It was our duty to act. Your duty was to protect the pack, not seize its reins, Kale said, stepping forward. And to do so without sanction, while spreading rumors of my death? The elder's lips tightened. We did what was necessary. The rogues struck deep, the betas were restless, and the alphas demanded leadership. The pack must not fracture. Kale's voice dropped to a deadly quiet. And did it not occur to you to look for your king before crowning yourselves in his absence? Howrick flinched at the words, but his gaze slid toward Mira. We had other concerns. Reports reached us of a wounded wolf taken in by a silent outcast on the outskirts of the forest. Mira stiffened under his scrutiny. Howrick's tone sharpened. An Omega, abandoned by her pack, suddenly harboring the king? A convenient story. How did she know where to find him? Why risk her life for a creature she did not recognize? Kale stepped in front of her, a growl rumbling low in his chest. Careful, Howrick. But the elder only smirked faintly. We have questions, my lord. The pack deserves answers. If your majesty has nothing to hide, then let the truth be spoken before the moon rises. Myra's pulse thundered. The hall buzzed with murmurs. A trial, public, humiliating. Kale's silver eyes burned. You would question me? Howrick spread his hands. You vanished without a trace, only to return changed, gentler, weaker. You bring a silent stranger and a foundling child. The people whisper, Kale. They wonder what spell she cast on you. The insult was deliberate. The crowd gasped. Myra's breath caught. Kale's hand clenched at his side. He stepped closer to Howrick, voice low and deadly. She cast no spell. She did what none of you would. She saved a life without asking what it was worth. The council chamber filled with murmurs. Howrick's gaze darted toward Mira, his expression unreadable. Then let her speak for herself. The words hit like a blow. Mira froze. Her silence, the thing that had protected her, defined her, now became a weapon in his hands. Kale turned sharply toward her. You don't have to, he murmured. They'll hear the truth from me. But she shook her head slowly. She was trembling, but there was something fierce behind her eyes. Her fingers brushed the small bracelet on her wrist, her mother's last gift. Her anchor. She stepped forward, hood falling back. The hall went silent. Howrick's voice was dripping with false concern. Can the silent one speak before her king? Every eye turned to her. Mira opened her mouth, her throat dry, her voice barely more than a whisper. You will listen. The echo that followed was like lightning breaking through the still air. The hall froze. She swallowed, forcing her words out through the tremor in her chest. I found him dying in the storm. You left your king to bleed alone. You called me cursed, useless, but I listened when no one else did. Howrick stepped back as though struck. Myra's voice grew stronger, steadier. You talk about power, but what did your power save? You sent soldiers to hunt rogues, not to protect your own. He would be dead if not for mercy, and that is something you all forgot. The hall trembled with murmurs, disbelief, awe. Kale stood motionless, watching her, pride and emotion warring in his gaze. Myra's voice softened, though it carried clear as thunder. He's not weaker. He's better. He's the king you should have had all along, the one who remembers that compassion is not a flaw. Silence. And then slowly, one by one, the betas in the hall dropped to one knee. The gesture rippled outward like a wave, spreading through the ranks until even the guards at the back bowed their heads. Only Howrick remained standing, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. You've bewitched them, he hissed. You've. Kale's voice cut through as like a blade. Enough. You've shown your hand, Howrick. He stepped forward, the air thick with his alpha presence. You lied to the pack. You lied to me. You told them I was dead, so you could rule in my name. You betrayed your oath. Howard stumbled back, pale now. You have no proof. Kale's smile was dangerous. I have her. He gestured toward Mira. And I have witnesses. Morina saw you forge my seal. Atticus followed your messenger's trail to the rogue camps you funded. Your treachery ends tonight. The crowd roared in outrage. Howard's face contorted, but before he could speak again, guards seized him by the arms. Kale turned back to Mira. The hall was still buzzing, but his focus was only on her. You found your voice, he said quietly. Her chest rose and fell, tears shining in her eyes. Because you needed it. He took her hand, right there in front of the council and pack alike. I've needed it from the moment I saw you. A murmur rippled through the hall, not of scandal but awe. The Alpha King and the Silent Omega, no longer silent, no longer unseen. Howard was dragged away screaming about curses and omens, but no one listened. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in unity. Wolves howled, the sound filling the great chamber, rising up to the vaulted ceilings like a promise reborn. Kale raised Myra's hand high, his voice echoing over the noise. This is Mira of the Valley, the healer who mended her king, the voice that silenced deceit, the one I will never again allow this pack to overlook. The cheers shook the walls. Mira felt her knees go weak, overwhelmed by the sound, by the light, by the impossible truth that she, once unwanted, forgotten, had just changed the course of a kingdom. And though she didn't say it aloud, her heart whispered the words she'd been too afraid to believe. Maybe I was never meant to be silent. The moon was still high when the great hall emptied, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke, pine, and victory. Outside, the capital had erupted in celebration, wolves howling to the heavens, the sound carrying far into the forests that had once been Kale's prison. Mira stood near the balcony, the night air cool against her skin. The city stretched beneath her, towers glittering like shards of starlight, torches flickering in the courtyards, and the hum of life thrumming through every stone. It was strange to think that only weeks ago she had been invisible, a silent ghost at the edge of the world. Now, she had stood before the pack and spoken, her words echoing through the heart of their kingdom. Behind her, Kale approached quietly. His steps were lighter now, the limp barely noticeable. He had shed his tattered shirt, and the firelight painted his skin in gold and shadow. You should rest, he said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. I can't, she murmured, her eyes still on the horizon. It doesn't feel real. Kale came to stand beside her, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. It's real because you made it so. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the fierce king the world feared, but the man who had bled on her floor, who had listened to her silence, who had chosen her not out of pity, but recognition. They'll never accept me, she said softly. Not all of them. Kale's hand brushed hers. They will learn. And if they don't, he smiled faintly, then they'll learn to fear disappointing me. Mira let out a shaky laugh, her first in what felt like years. The sound startled her, but Kale's smile widened, as if that single laugh was worth every scar he carried. Below, the howls grew louder, a song of loyalty, of renewal. Kale turned to her, his expression unreadable. There's something you haven't seen yet, he said, extending his hand. She hesitated, then took it. He led her down the grand staircase, through corridors lined with ancient banners, until they stepped out into the inner courtyard. Lanterns floated in shallow pools, casting reflections that shimmered like moonlight on water. At the center of the courtyard, a cradle woven from silverwood stood surrounded by blossoms, pale moonflowers that glowed faintly in the dark. Mira froze. Riven. The child lay asleep inside, wrapped in soft furs. Morina stood nearby, her expression softer than usual. He's safe, she said quietly. And the pack knows he is the king's ward. No one will harm him. Myra's throat tightened. Thank you. Morina inclined her head. You've changed things here, child. More than you know. As the healer left, Kale stepped closer to the cradle. He'll grow up in peace, he said. Not as a weapon, not as a pawn. he'll have the chance we never did. Mira touched the child's tiny hand, her heart swelling with a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. When she looked up, Kale was watching her, the intensity in his gaze so raw it made her pulse stumble. "What is it?" she whispered. He took a slow breath, his hand finding hers. "When I lay dying, I thought the world had taken everything from me. Power, loyalty, purpose. I thought I was nothing but a weapon waiting to rust." He paused, his voice low and rough. "Then I saw you, and you didn't look away." Myra's eyes stung. "I couldn't." "You should have," he said with a half-smile. "You would have been safer." She shook her head. "Safety isn't the same as living." Kale's thumb brushed her knuckles. "Then stay and live with me." The words hung between them, a vow, a promise, a plea. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You were right," he said softly. "Compassion isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever known. And I've spent my life trying to lead by fear when all I needed to do was listen." Mira blinked back tears. "I don't know how to be what they expect." "Good," Kale said with a grin. "Because what I expect is you." The laughter that escaped her then was bright and fragile and real. Kale's hand slid to her waist, pulling her close, and for a moment the world was just the two of them, the Stormborn King and the silent Omega who had taught him mercy. Above them, the moon shifted through the clouds, silver light spilling across the courtyard. "Mira," Kale whispered. She tilted her head up. "Yes." He smiled, the kind of smile that carried both reverence and hunger. "Say my name." She hesitated, then breathed it softly, clearly.
Kale.
His eyes closed briefly, as if her voice itself was the answer to a prayer he hadn't known he'd made. Then he kissed her, slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that unravels years of pain and turns silence into music. Her hands gripped his shoulders, her heartbeat quickened, and when they finally broke apart, she was breathless and whole in ways she'd never imagined. The sound of howls rose again, not for war this time, but for unity, for rebirth. Kale turned toward the crowd gathering at the gates of the courtyard. Betas, Omegas, and Alphas alike bowed as they entered, their voices rising in one harmonious cry. "Long live the king and his Luna." Mira froze. "Luna?" Kale looked down at her, his eyes bright with mischief and truth. "Did you think I'd let them call you anything less?" Her breath caught. "You didn't even ask." "I didn't have to," he murmured, brushing his lips against her temple. "You were mine from the moment you opened that door." The pack's voices swelled, the night vibrating with their devotion. Mira looked out at them, not as a frightened outcast, but as the woman who had found her courage in the quiet. Her silence had once been her curse, but now it was her crown. She took Kale's hand and lifted her chin to the crowd. Her voice carried clear and strong. "I am no one's shadow anymore. I am Mira of the Moon, your Luna, not because I was chosen, but because I chose." The courtyard erupted in cheers that shook the stone walls. Kale turned to her, eyes gleaming with pride. "You've given them hope. And you've given them a reason to believe again," she replied softly. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Then we've done our duty." As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Mira looked up at the fading stars and felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Peace. Not silence. Not invisibility.
Peace.
And as Kale's arm came around her shoulders, the world seemed to settle into perfect balance. Two souls, one fierce and one quiet, bound not by ceremony, but by choice. No longer a girl hidden in the shadows. No longer a king haunted by ghosts. Together, they had rewritten the story. And under the light of the new moon, the silent Omega finally spoke, not to be heard, but to be understood. And that was the story of the silent Omega and the Alpha King. A tale of power, of mercy, of finding a voice in a world that only listens to strength. Mira began as a shadow, silent, unseen, and became the heartbeat of a kingdom. And Kale, the wolf who thought he'd lost everything, found his soul where he least expected it. If this story touched you, if you felt even a little of that fire, that ache, that hope, then don't let this be the last world you step into. Subscribe now for more dark fantasy love stories, where broken souls find each other, where kingdoms rise and fall for love, and where silence itself can become a weapon. Because here, every ending is just the beginning of another tale. Until next time, may your shadows find their light.